ATC 202 Midway Milwaukee, Introduction to Midway and Milwaukee Tower for our S2 students. First, focusing on Midway Tower. All of these items that we discuss here in the SOPs, LOAs, and policy can be found in the training packages in those folders. Should you have any questions, obviously you can always ask your instructors or post in the Discord as well. Our vZAU ATC policy and our ATC policy doc talks about the TDLs. It says for airports with PDC capability, of course that's Midway, Milwaukee, and O'Hare. If possible, clearance should be issued via PDC using the TDLs on the VNAS website. Your instructor will show you how to do this. If departure clearances cannot be issued via PDC, issue the clearance verbally. The ASD, when a runway is closed or the following procedures shall be met: advertise the closure on the ATIS. An X shall be placed on the closed runway. A red box shall be drawn around any portion of runway not available for taxi. When a runway or a taxiway is inactive, unusable, or restricted, a yellow trait box and an X shall be placed on the ASD indicating the runway is inactive. These are, as we've mentioned before, persistent. When you close out your CRC, anything that you have done on the ASD will be reflected for the next controller, so please undo anything that you have done. The items that are there, mostly the taxiway closures and such, should already be taken care of for you. There's really not much you should need to do besides just placing the X on the closed runways. We do have videos on our YouTube channel for ASD and STARS usage, so you can review those and how to do these things. Tower cap positions, obviously we have local ground delivery listed out in our SOP. Runway configurations, I would always suggest using the D8S website to see what the real world is doing. That'll help you with making decisions on which runway should be active, and also the flow of O'Hare. But you can see the different configurations here depending upon winds directly out of the SOP. In the C90 Midway LOA document, under the delegation section, C90, which is the TRACON overlying, delegates to Midway, which is you, the local controller or the ground controller, authority to vector IFR departure aircraft climbing to 3,000 within the designated departure areas as depicted in Appendix A, as Midway 2500 to surface, provided Midway ensures IFR departures comply with the restrictions of the Midway SID, and eastbound departures operate no closer than 2 miles from the Willis Tower on an assigned heading of 090 or further south. Authority and responsibility to provide the following services in the Midway delegated airspace: radar separation, except that C90 must be responsible for the sequencing of IFR aircraft for the primary arrival runway. Midway Tower must be responsible for separation between IFR arrivals at the contact release point for instrument approach and use. This is typically the final approach fix. And if we were to look at the C90 side of this, where it says Midway delegates to C90, it would actually say something along the lines of aircraft should be transferred no later than the final approach fix on an instrument approach. Visual separation between aircraft and special VFR operations. Authority to provide radar service to VFR aircraft below the Chicago Bravo airspace. This is a radar tower, so we can use the STARS display, tag up aircraft, and provide VFR services. Authority to use 5100 series beacon codes for VFR aircraft. Of course, this is not yet implemented in CRC. Hopefully it will be someday. For now, just use the CRC assigned beacon code in the flight plan. C90 delegates Midway the airspace within the Chicago Charlie airspace as depicted in Appendix A. So you can see the red, of course, is the Bravo, brown the arrival descent area that TRACON is using, and the blue the primary surface area. You can see the altitudes there too and the different configurations as to what the tower controller owns. This is going to be particularly important when you've got aircraft that are transiting the airspace over flights and that sort of thing, and also as you know, your jurisdiction for your VFR aircraft as well as IFR aircraft. Midway SOP local controls duties and responsibilities. So out of the SOP document, local provides approved separation and ATC services in the Chicago Charlie service area and all active runways. Of course, issues takeoff and landing clearances. Provides special VFR services and emergency assistance aircraft. Approve or disapprove opposite direction runway approaches. Designate active runways. Advise ground control on completion of any runway change. Coordinate with the affected departure controller prior to issuing a heading that will take the aircraft outside the departure area. We do have specific assigned headings that we give these aircraft. The IFR departures, will show you those later on in the slideshow. Coordinate with ground control if aircraft be kept on local's frequency while in grounds area jurisdiction, except the local may issue instructions that require aircraft to enter and taxi on taxiways prior to the aircraft contacting ground control. And of course, that's most likely to be when an aircraft exits the runway. Coordinate with ground control prior to authorizing helicopter operations in ground control's area of jurisdiction. Be responsible for aircraft that have been previously sequenced by approach. If local, adjust the arrival sequence or separation. Ensure all departures have received the appropriate departure frequency. That's why we would say Southwest 1 contact Chicago departure 119.0 after their takeoff, so that we have sure that they have the departure frequency, especially during events when we have multiple frequencies up. Scan your area of responsibility. Separate IFR and Midway Class Charlie service area traffic and issue appropriate traffic advisories and safety alerts between VFR aircraft operating within delegated airspace. Again, you're a radar tower. Runway control. Runways not advertised on the ATIS during parallel runway operations are inactive for air traffic purposes. Runway closures shall be displayed on the ASD safety logic. We talked about that already. Local must coordinate with ground prior to landing an aircraft on an inactive runway. The runway must be considered active until local advises ground the runway is no longer in use. Ensure all runway exits are kept clear so as arrivals may taxi unimpeded past runway hold short lines. Local may issue instructions that require aircraft to enter and taxi on taxiways prior to the aircraft contacting ground control. Local will keep aircraft landing on their frequency until clear of associated parallel taxiways and parallel operations. Intersection departures, a table with runway lengths available from certain intersections located in Appendix C. You can find that in the SOP. Protect the ILS, PUFC, OSTS critical areas in Appendix D in accordance with the FAA 7110 document. Under local control, VFR traffic pattern aircraft in our SOP, VFR traffic pattern for props is 1,500 feet, 2,000 for turboprops and jets. Missed approach procedures. Issue IFR aircraft on a missed approach or go around a departure heading and altitude consistent with the configuration and traffic. We do have standard departure headings, so we'd want to make sure that that aircraft is given one of those headings and 3,000 feet consistent with our departures. We'll go over that later on in the show here. Coordinate missed approach information with C90. Obviously, you want to talk to the departure controller, let them know that you've got to go around. Treat VFR missed approaches as a VFR departure. Now, in that case, you could likely just ask them to re-enter the downwind. Give them a pattern entry instruction, essentially. Overflights. Aircraft that will transit the airport boundaries must be on tower's frequency prior to entering tower's delegated airspace. Control transfer and frequency change may be made when these aircraft are clear of the boundary area in an outbound direction. Aircraft transitioning local control delegated airspace clear of the airport boundary may be pointed out, refused, or handed off at the discretion of local control. So the aircraft that's leaving the airspace, you've likely tagged them up, given them a beacon code, radar identified them. So once they're leaving our airspace, we'd want to say, something like proceed on course, maintain VFR, or simply squawk VFR frequency change approved. If they're looking for flight following or continue the radar service, we could hand them back, flash them, and hand them back over to the departure controller. Eastbound departures and MVA waiver. IFR aircraft may operate no closer than 2 nautical miles from the Wills Tower, which of course is northeast of the airport, provided their assigned altitude is at or above 3,000 MSL and their assigned heading is 090 degrees or further south. Reduce separation on final. Down from 3 miles, we can go 2.5 nautical mile separation authorized between aircraft landing 4 right, 22 left, and 31 center, and less than midway METARs, less than 2 miles of visibility. Under the best practices section, be aware of successive departures that may turn inside the previous departure. VFR aircraft passing over midfield circling for a parallel runway may be a factor for an IFR arrival executing an unplanned missed approach. Just goes to whole you're separating your traffic, anticipating and scanning for traffic. Maintain awareness during cross-runway departures, especially when departures are in takeoff position. So obviously if you gave a lineup and wait and had an aircraft departing or crossing runway, you want to make sure you keep an eye on those guys, that they don't start their takeoff roll. Be ordered for aircraft exiting a runway changing to ground control frequency prior to crossing the parallel runway. So we're going to keep those guys on our frequency, get them across the parallel runway, and then tell them to contact ground. IFR weather considerations and visual separation is not being applied between arrivals and departures. IFR separation must be applied, 2 miles increasing to 3 miles within 1 minute after takeoff. This applies to intersecting parallel runways. Successive aircraft making the same initial turn, so let's say it's 250 going over PQ for instance, even if not on the same initial heading, do not diverge immediately, therefore 1 nautical mile 15 degrees separation is not applicable. Now I will say, with the runways being 6,000 feet at midway, it's almost impossible to not get SRS. If you've got SRS of 6,000 feet, it's almost impossible to not get 3 miles in trail, which is what we need minimum IFR to IFR separation en route, in the TRACON anyway. VFR traffic along the expressways may be traffic for arrivals and departures. Tower applied visual separation is not authorized when wake turbulence separation is required. We're going to talk about that several times today. We're going to talk about pilot applied visual separation for wake turbulence separation in a lot of cases. Coordinate with C90 and advise traffic management unit if staffed if an adjustment to spacing on final is required, likely for an event where you're ultra busy. C90 Midway LOA general section says Midway must, which is you, the tower, utilize quick look. We'll show you how to do that on the stars display. Aircraft data blocks that display aircraft identification, type, and scratch pad information for the data transfer, identification of arrivals. Advertise on the ATIS of primary incident approach to be executed and coordinate changes when required. Enter onto the IDS the current ATIS code, runway, and approach in use. We just use the Discord for the IDS. We have an IDS channel. Notify C90 when weather conditions change between VFR and IFR. Back to our SOP, departure procedures. The local control must ensure departing aircraft have crossed all runways along the taxi route that lead to departure runway before takeoff clearance is issued. Issue IFR departure headings in accordance with the C90 Midway LOA. We're going to show you those momentarily. Issue VFR departure heading, aircraft heading to protect the arrival areas in use. Obviously, we don't want our VFRs cutting through the arrival descent area that our approach controller has aircraft on for the approach. Restrict IFR departures to an altitude at or below 3,000 MSL consistent with the MVA, the minimum vectoring altitude, and must assign initial departure headings inside the departure area based on the selected active traffic flow. That goes back to our point above about IFR departure headings. Again, we'll cover that soon. Ensure automatic acquisition of IFR or Midway Class Charlie service area departure tracks prior to changing aircraft to Chicago departure. Basically, this means auto track for the departure controller. Once they leave the runway surface, you should see it change over to a Z in the bubble more than likely. And that basically means that Chicago departure has tracked the aircraft automatically through the stars. Immediately coordinate with the appropriate departure controller if track does not automatically acquire or is in the wrong position tag. So if you don't see that aircraft tag up or automatically acquired by the departure controller, you might just want to give them a shout. Ensure aircraft has started the turn to the assigned heading with the departure area before changing frequency to departure. So observe the turn, the heading that you had assigned before handing over to departure. Because in most cases we've got a very limited amount of time and airspace to get that aircraft on a proper heading for the airspace or downtown in a lot of cases. Coordinate non-standard departure headings. If you need to turn a guy right as opposed to the left or use a different heading for traffic, talk to the departure controller over top. Continuing on with departure procedures, Midway must issue IFR clearance in accordance with Appendix C. You can look at that in the doc. Some stuff in there about tech routes. Issue the Midway SID and headings in Appendix D to all IFR departures. Not issue departure headings between 350 degrees clockwise to 089 degrees to ensure obstacle avoidance. All runway departures must complete the initial assigned heading within 4 miles of Midway. And the 350 around at 089 is going to be to the north and northwest for the Bravo and O'Hare. Around clockwise, the 089 is going to be for downtown. Obviously, there's buildings there. Ensure east departures operate no closer to 2 nautical miles to Willis Tower. Sort of goes hand in hand with the statement we just read above. Approach any turn that will cross limits and approach in use. Provide a minimum of 8 miles separation between a jet departing behind a prop aircraft on the same heading, and this will happen to you often. Going west or going south, a lot of those headings are the same. We do have a little bit of a divergence that we can give going east, you'll see. Provide the TRACON with flight progress strip at the time of departure and prior to leaving tower airspace. Of course, this is for their rolling call for radar identification. Typically what I would just say is just ask the radar controller above you, does he want strips or not? Technically speaking, the answer should always be yes, but it is vZAU. Advise C90 if a departure aircraft data block does not acquire within 3 miles of the airport, subsequent departures not on the runway must be held until coordination has been accomplished. So the one on the runway can go, but the subsequent departure should be held until this gets worked out. Coordinate any formation or round-robin test flights prior to release. In the LOA under Traffic Management, Midway must advise Traffic Management Unit or TMU when Midway operator departure delays exceed 15 minutes from the time the aircraft calls ready to taxi. Monitor the IDS-4 for updates on ground stops or ESP. Again, that's in the Discord. Advise TMU of aircraft that need ESP release time. C90, which is the TRACON, must coordinate TMU restrictions with Midway. Special VFR operations. Midway Tower must conduct special VFR operations within Midway Airport Class Charlie surface area at or below 2,500 feet MSL. Ensure all special VFR operations are conducted in accordance with the 7110 document. Example phraseology for us here: November 172 Sierra Papa Midway Tower. Cleared out of the Midway surface area, maintain special VFR conditions at or below 2,000. Which is also very similar to our standard VFR departure clearance. If you remember, maintain VFR at about 2,000 while in the Chicago Charlie airspace. So we'll just stick to 2,000 feet for the special VFR as well. Keep things standard. Midway lineup and wait procedures. 2 aircraft with similar sound and call signs should never be placed in lineup and wait simultaneously. Do not authorize lineup wait operations at an intersection between sunset and sunrise or when the intersection is not in sight from the tower. Lineup and wait is not authorized for intersecting runway operations unless the following conditions exist. Controllers should be able to visually observe all departure points from the tower. When an aircraft is authorized to line up and wait on an intersecting runway, traffic shall be exchanged between that aircraft and the aircraft that is authorized to line up and wait, depart, or arrive to the intersecting departure. We do a cross runways departure sweat box that we will cover a lot of this for you in the training. When weather reported conditions are less than 800 feet of visibility or less than 2 miles of visibility, do not clear an aircraft for a full stop, touch and go, options, or unrestricted low approach when a departing aircraft has been instructed to line up and wait on the same runway. The landing clearance may be issued once the aircraft in position has started takeoff roll. Do not authorize an aircraft to line up and wait if an aircraft has been cleared to land, touch and go, stop and go, option, or unrestricted low approach on the same runway. The training that we do at Lafayette, when we're a tower, we don't have a safety logic system in the ASD. For Lafayette, is essentially the same deal here at Midway when the weather is not good. We can't do the lineup and waits if we've got someone cleared to land, and vice versa. The intent of lineup wait is to position aircraft for imminent departure. When an aircraft is authorized to line up and wait, issue traffic as follows. To a departing aircraft about an arriving aircraft. Inform the aircraft of closing arriving aircraft within 6 flying miles that is expected to land on the same runway. Aircraft landing on an intersecting runway. So for instance, Southwest 1, runway 31 center, lineup and wait, traffic on a 4-mile final. To an arrival, aircraft holding on the same runway. Aircraft holding on the same runway but with holding a landing clearance. Aircraft holding on intersecting runway. When an aircraft is put up in a line of wait, inform the aircraft of any aircraft that's holding on an intersecting runway. So your example there might be Southwest 1, runway 4 right, clear to land, traffic holding in position, will depart prior to your arrival. Something like that. You'll get a lot of practice with that in the sweat box. Midway cross-runway departure operations. The local may initiate cross-runway departure operations when advantageous. You're going to want to tell the ground controller cross-runway departure. Authorized cross-runway departure operations or runways are as follows. So if we're in a 3-1 center configuration, our cross-runway would be 2-2 left, and that'll be depicted on the diagrams we're going to show you later on as well. Ground may taxi aircraft across runways. The runway must be considered active till the local advises the runway is no longer in use. And you'll just coordinate that with your ground controller. Hey, we're going to send these guys, perhaps your eastbounds, to this runway, everyone else to this runway. Just coordinate that internally. Crossing runways advertised on the ATIS are considered inactive for air traffic purposes until local confirms with the ground control that the runway is clear of traffic prior to issuing takeoff or landing clearance to an aircraft on the runway. Local must confirm a cross runway is clear of all other traffic with ground control prior to issuing takeoff clearances. Multiple rolling calls may be coordinated by local requesting a specific number of times they intend to depart the crossing runway. So local, for instance, may say rolling runway 22 left 3 times. And ground will say clear runway 22 left, and then local can issue those takeoff clearances. Successive departures. So where an airport where radar coverage exists and departure radar identification established within 1 mile, the takeoff runway controllers may use departure courses divergence as a way of departure separation before the standard radar separation is achieved. It means instead of trying to space all your departures to minimum terminal separation of 3 to 5 miles apart, 3 really for us is from the tower to the TRACON, lesser minimum may be used, provided the aircraft's departure courses diverge. This does not, however, include successive departures participating in wake turbulence separation, in which case the standard wake turbulence in-trail spacing should be used. And you can use radar separation for that or timed. Usually it's just easier to use timed, the 2 minutes or 3 minutes. But as you can see, you only need 1 mile in trail instead of 3 miles in trail if you have 15 degrees or more of divergence here. Now, the picture on the right is a good example of O'Hare where we've got parallel runways, but in that case it would actually be separated by more than 2,500 feet. With more than 2,500 feet, you can do simultaneous departures immediately, as long as you have the 15 degrees of divergence. But here it could also represent Midway with less than 2,500 feet. As long as we have the 15 degrees or more of divergence, we can have aircraft 1 mile in trail instead of the 3. So now we're finally getting those pictures that we've mentioned a few times now, our LOA departure headings with C90, the C90 Midway Air Traffic Control Tower LOA. And these are the headings that we're expected to give our IFR departures. So we'll focus on the document on the left there, runway 31 center departure headings, cross runway of 22 left. You can see the dashed or dotted lines there for the departure headings for runway 22 left, the solid for 31 center. And if you look there, you can see PQ/pumpkin, west and north with west in parentheses. We're going to give a 250 heading. Our souths will always get a 220. That's our aircraft going over Aceto, Bacon, Comiskey, Dent, or Earned. Then we have north and east with east in parentheses, going over Lukey or Pumpkin on a 090110 heading. You can see Pumpkin listed twice. The parentheses there, west or east, is the flow of O'Hare. So let's look at the west and north. So all of my west departures are going to be over PQ will get a 250 heading. If O'Hare is in a west flow, then I would also give my north departures, my Pumpkins, a 250. If O'Hare was in a east flow, I would give my Pumpkins a 090 through a 110 heading. And then, of course, our other runways 4 right and 13 center. You can see the headings, whether O'Hare is in an east or west flow, and our cross runway configuration. Same runway or less than 2,500 feet apart. Full length, any aircraft behind a super needs 3 minutes of separation. Any aircraft behind a heavier 7.5 needs 2. Small behind a 7.5 needs 2. And of course, intersections you should know from the Academy, we add 1 minute. The special note and special emphasis, because we do get pattern aircraft at Midway. Those runways are separated by less than 2,500 feet. Aircraft in the pattern are considered to be departing from an intersection, so we would want to add a minute for pattern aircraft. Obviously, there's ways around that, pilot applied visual separation. Wake turbulence application, issue wake turbulence advisory the position, altitude if known, and the direction of flight of a heavy aircraft to aircraft landing behind a departing or arriving heavy on the same or parallel runway separated by less than 2,500 feet. Note it says departing or arriving. Or a 757 large to a small landing behind a departing or arriving 757 or large aircraft on the same or parallel runway separated by less than 2,500 feet. This happens a lot at Midway. We've got small aircraft landing behind large, potentially 757s. Real world Delta does fly 75s in and out of Midway. Example, runway 27 left, clear to land, caution wake turbulence, heavy Boeing 747 departing runway 27 right. Or number 2, following Boeing 757 on a 2-mile final, caution wake turbulence. And from the Academy and our other slides, you should know the difference now between wake turbulence separation and wake turbulence advisory. And then we've got distance between runway center lines there. Runways 22 left, 22 right, 920 feet. And then we've got 31 center, 31 left, separated by only 500 feet. Which is actually significant because if we had a 757 depart 31 center and a small depart 31 left, we're looking at this here. Separate a small behind a 75 aircraft by 2 minutes when departing the same runway or parallel runway separated by less than 700 feet. A parallel runway separated by 700 feet or more if projected flight paths will cross. Where might this apply at Midway? Well, it could apply for a 75 that departed runway 4 right and made a left-hand turnout crossing the departure path of runway 4 left. But it could also apply to 31 center and 31 left, as those are only separated by 500 feet. So our small departing runway 31 left would then need the 2 minutes if a 757 departed runway 31 center. Just a quick review of avoiding wake turbulence. This is what pilots do, or what they're expected to do when we give an advisory. From the tower controller or your perspective, the separation in the advisories that we would want to provide in our top example. If I have an aircraft that departs behind another aircraft, I certainly need to give potential wake turbulence separation. Could be time. If this is a heavy aircraft departing and I have a 172 departing after that aircraft, I absolutely need to give the 2 minutes of separation. I also want to give the wake turbulence advisory. So to the Cessna, I would want to say something along the lines of previous departing aircraft, heavy Boeing 767, caution wake turbulence, and then continue with the takeoff instruction. The second example down, there's really nothing that you would need to say because the 172 will never encounter any wake turbulence from the aircraft that landed. Our third example down, our 172 is landing. We'll just say that's a 737. It's not a heavy, but we still want to say caution wake turbulence in that case. So previous departing aircraft, Boeing 737, caution wake turbulence, runway 4 right, clear to land, or runway 4 left. And then our last example, again, same thing. Previous arriving aircraft, Boeing 737, caution wake turbulence, runway 4 left, clear to land. Always want to give that advisory. Now, if that was a heavy, that's a different story. Again, we should know already the difference between advisories and when we're required to give separation and how to use pilot applied visual separation. And I do have a few examples of that at Midway in particular here. We've got an example that maybe, hopefully you can see. We've got a 737 that's going to depart runway 4 right, an A320 on about a 6-mile final to 4 right, and I've got a Piper in the pattern who is clearly a small. This would just be a simple advisory. So number 515 Golf Sierra, traffic departing the parallel Boeing 737, additional traffic A320 on a 6-mile final, caution wake turbulence, runway 4 left, clear for the option. And it's only an advisory because those are large aircraft. Now, our next example, we've got 2 heavy aircraft, and here we would need to do the pilot applied visual separation or provide the time from the time that that aircraft departs or the next aircraft there arrives, crosses the threshold. I would need to give the 3 minutes. Obviously, I can avoid that with the pilot applied visual separation. So in this case, I would say number 515 Golf Sierra, traffic departing the parallel, heavy Boeing 767, additional traffic, heavy Boeing 767 on a 6-mile final for the parallel, report the traffic in sight. And if he says he has the aircraft in sight, I can say caution wake turbulence, runway 4 left, clear for the option. An alternative would be to say maintain visual separation, caution wake turbulence, runway 4 left, clear for the option. But I need to ensure that that aircraft has those 2 in sight for the pilot applied visual separation to waive the wake turbulence requirements in the terms of the time or the radar separation. Because if you remember from our previous slide, it did say the aircraft in the pattern are considered to be departing from an intersection. And so this aircraft departing or landing behind that aircraft to the parallel there would need at least 3 minutes if they didn't have that aircraft in sight with the pilot applied visual separation. C90 Midway LOA, back to our document. Arrival procedures. Midway must be responsible for separation of arrivals inside the final approach fix except when the METAR is below basic VFR minimums. Instruct aircraft requesting practice instrument approaches to contact C90 on the appropriate frequency. Advise C90 of any aircraft executing a missed approach and issue a heading corresponding to the departure headings in use unless alternate missed approach instructions are directed by C90. So if you were to go back in our video where we showed those standard headings, you may remember the 250 heading for a PQ. We had a 090 to a 110 going east over Lukey, and I believe it was a 220 heading going south over Aceto, Bacon, Comiskey, Den, Earn. For a missed approach procedure, we need to issue at least one of those headings. It doesn't matter which, but we definitely need to do one of those headings and a climb to 3000 and then coordinate with C90. And of course, notify C90 if any required adjustment to the arrival interval. If they're sending them too tight, we need to let them know. Milwaukee Tower, tower cab positions. Our same ATC policy with the TTLs and the ASD. Service area jurisdiction, this is what the tower controller owns there at Milwaukee. You can see on the arrival descent area, they own from the surface to below 3,000 feet and at or below 5,000 feet on the departure side. When landing runway 25 left, the cab, coordinator, tower, OS, or CIC was controller in charge. When designated, or local control may coordinate with I or E for extended departure headings. Those are your departure controllers at Milwaukee, which exceed 275 degrees. When expanded headings are in effect, the airspace affected in Appendix 3-2, which is on the right there, labeled Area 1 at or below 5,000, temporary delegated to local control. Overly complicated at Milwaukee. Generally speaking, you can give departure headings. We're going to get into that momentarily. It's usually easiest to just give runway heading. Local responsibilities. Again, this is still Milwaukee. Direct the movement of all aircraft on the active runways. Provide standard separation radar service to aircraft within local control's delegated airspace as depicted in Appendix 3.1 and 3.2 local control airspace. You can look that up in the appendix of the Milwaukee SOP. Coordinate all landing and departing helicopter operations with ground. Ensure acquisition of all STARS data tags to the appropriate departure control position. Again, they should be doing an auto track. And you should be pushing a strip. The tower TDWs may be used for any terminal radar function without limitation. Release all IFR and VFR departures silently, in other words, without coordination. And issue initial headings as follows. Again, as I said, make sure you push that strip for the IFRs for sure. Headings must ensure all departures may clear of the primary arrival runway dump zone, or the finals box. I'm going to skip down to number 2. Headings must ensure all departures exit local airspace into the airspace of the appropriate departure controller. However, runway heading may be used without coordination for aircraft departing a primary arrival runway. So I say it's usually easiest to just give runway heading. And the rest there you can pause and read if you like. Successive departures, same as midway. As long as we're giving our 15 degrees of divergence, we can depart aircraft 1 mile and trail. Transfer of control. Departure control has control of departures in local control airspace on contact. With the following exceptions, departure control must not turn back toward the departure runway center line. Departure control must not turn the aircraft if local control marks NT on the flight progress strip in block 9 alpha. And departure control must not stop short of local control assigned altitudes or headings. That's what you can expect from your departure controller. Unplanned missed approach procedures. Again, at Milwaukee, local will apply these procedures to all Milwaukee IFR aircraft executing an unplanned missed approach. Issue 4,000 feet. Note, when issuing 4,000, local control must remain within delegated airspace as defined in Appendix 3-1 and 3-2 unless otherwise coordinated. Issue a heading in accordance with noise abatement which misses the primary runway dump zone. I would likely just give runway heading. Complete a flight progress strip and forward to the appropriate departure controller and transfer the aircraft to the appropriate departure controller. Transfer the comms. That completes our slideshow for our ATC 202 Midway and Milwaukee Introduction to Midway Milwaukee Tower. Any questions, ask your instructors, review the documents, or ask in the Discord.